The air shimmered, not with heat a distant oven emits, but with the infernal breath of a living, hungry monster. Flames, orange and crimson, devoured the ancient eucalyptus trees, their crackling hunger echoing through the parched jungle. Smoke, thick and acrid, clawed at the lungs, painting the sky an apocalyptic shade of ochre. Through this inferno, a silhouette tore across the ravaged landscape, a fleeting spectre against the backdrop of unimaginable destruction. It was a dingo, low to the ground, a blur of tawny fur, its eyes reflecting the desperate, fiery glow around it. Clutched precariously in its jaws was something small, something precious, a singular hope against the encroaching devastation. This image, raw and terrifying, etched itself into the very essence of the burning world, a testament to instinct and courage. This was Kaya, a dingo whose very name, in ancient tongues, meant pure. And pure her spirit was, distilled by the harsh realities of the Australian outback. She wasn't just any dingo. Her intelligence was legendary among the sparse human settlements and the animal kingdom alike. Her keen senses, honed by generations of survival, perceived the subtlest shifts in wind, the faintest tremor in the earth, the silent stories carried on the air. But her most defining trait was her fiercely protective nature, a bond forged deep within her maternal heart. Her pups were her universe, the small yipping bundles of fur that represented the continuation of her line, the future of her spirit. Every hunt, every watchful night, every wary sniff of a new scent was ultimately for them. Life in the outback was a constant dance with nature's extremes, but the current dry season had been particularly unforgiving. The sun had beaten down relentlessly for months, baking the earth into a brittle shell, turning once lush undergrowth into tinder. Every leaf, every blade of grass whispered of fire. The animals knew it, the humans knew it, and Kaya, with her innate connection to the land, felt it deep in her bones. The threat of bushfires wasn't just a possibility, it was an inevitability, a ticking clock counting down to disaster. She had been scouting, as always, for new sources of water, for safer hunting grounds, her mind always calculating, always planning for the worst. Her den, a carefully hidden burrow beneath a cluster of ancient rocks, usually felt like an impenetrable fortress, a sanctuary for her young. But even there, the omnipresent dust felt like a premonition. Then the whisper of smoke became a roar. It wasn't a slow, creeping fire, but a sudden, violent eruption, startlingly far from her den, yet advancing with terrifying speed, a dry lightning strike, a careless human. The cause was irrelevant now. The effect was a wall of flame, hungry and relentless, devouring everything in its path. Kaya had been foraging, a short distance from her pups, when the first gusts of superheated wind buffeted her, carrying with them the unmistakable stench of burning timber and scorched earth. Her heart, a drum against her ribs, hammered a frantic rhythm. Her first, most primal instinct was to race back, to gather her pups, to shield them with her own body. But a cold, calculating corner of her mind, a trait that had kept her lineage alive through countless generations, quickly assessed the situation. The fire was moving too fast. If she ran directly to them, she might reach them, yes, but what then? They would be trapped, encircled by the blaze. She needed a plan, a route. And crucially, she needed to gather essential resources first. Her mind raced. The small hidden cache of dried meat she had stored near a specific waterhole, the ancient gnarled tree whose hollow trunk sometimes offered temporary shelter from the fiercest rains. These thoughts flashed through her mind, each a fragment of a desperate strategy. The decision was agonizing, a brutal choice between instinct and survival. Should she prioritize the immediate safety of her pups, risking their eventual entrapment, or gather provisions and a potential escape route, gambling on her speed and the pups' ability to remain hidden for a few precious moments longer? The smoke was already thickening, stinging her eyes, blurring the familiar contours of her beloved territory. The heat was becoming unbearable, a tangible force pressing down on her. The earth beneath her paws vibrated with the thunderous advance of the conflagration. She could hear the terrified shrieks of other animals, the desperate flapping of wings, the crashing of falling trees. This was not merely a fire, it was the world ending, and her pups were at its very heart. Every fiber of her being screamed to run to them, disregarding everything else. But the cold logic of survival, honed by merciless centuries, demanded prudence. She had to think, even as her fear threatened to consume her. The choice, though terrible, had to be made, and made quickly, for time was a luxury she no longer possessed. To witness more gripping tales of survival and extraordinary animal bravery, make sure to subscribe to our channel. The orange glow on the horizon quickly intensified, consuming the sky Kaya had always known. What began as a distant flicker now roared with terrifying speed, a wall of flame and smoke that devoured everything in its path. The familiar scents of eucalyptus and damp earth were replaced by the acrid stench of burning timber and charring undergrowth. Kaya's instincts, honed by generations of survival, screamed at her. This was no ordinary bushfire. This was a monster, growing exponentially, turning her once safe jungle home into a deadly, unpredictable maze. She had nudged her 3 pups, small bundles of fur and yips, towards the relatively clear path she'd identified earlier, a narrow game trail leading to a rocky outcrop she knew offered some protection. But as they scampered forward, a new front of fire exploded to their left, fueled by a sudden, violent updraft. The flames leaped across the clearing they intended to cross, blocking their escape route with a searing, impassable barrier. Kaya whined, a low, guttural sound of frustration and fear. The heat was already oppressive, making the air thick and difficult to breathe. Her fur, usually so sleek and protective, now felt like a magnet for the ambient warmth. The primary obstacle wasn't just the fire's relentless advance, but its capricious nature. One moment a section seemed clear, only for embers to ignite dry leaves and create a new, swirling inferno within seconds. Trees, once towering sentinels of the forest, now crashed to the ground with deafening cracks and sprays of sparks, their fall sending tremors through the earth. One such giant, a centuries-old ironbark, plummeted directly across the path Kaya had just considered, narrowly missing her and her terrified pups. The sheer force of its impact sent a shockwave of hot air and ash over them, coating their fur in a fine grey dust. Beyond the physical barriers, the jungle was filled with the terrifying sounds of panic. Kookaburras shrieked, their usually jovial calls now guttural screams of distress. Wallabies bounded blindly through the undergrowth, their eyes wide with terror, some colliding with trees in their desperate scramble. Pythons, usually slow and deliberate, writhed across the ground with surprising speed, seeking any patch of unburnt earth. The air vibrated with the collective terror of 1,000 creatures, and Kaya felt it deep in her bones. Even the bravest dingo could not reason with a force this primal, this all-consuming. Kaya tried a different route, heading north towards a seasonal creek bed, hoping the damper soil might offer a brief respite. She led her pups, nudging them gently but firmly, urging them to keep pace despite their tiny legs. They whimpered, their small bodies trembling, not just from fear but from the sheer exertion. The smoke was becoming thicker, acrid and suffocating, making her eyes water and her throat burn. She dropped to a low crouch, trying to stay beneath the densest plumes, knowing that every breath deeper into the smoke was a step closer to disorientation and collapse. As they pressed on, her jaw instinctively tightened around a small, smoothed piece of wood she always carried. It was a worn carving, a simple elongated shape that resembled a spirit, or perhaps a stylized ancestor, passed down from her mother. It offered no practical benefit, provided no food or shelter, but it was a tangible link to her past, a small anchor in the maelstrom of the present. In moments of extreme stress, she often found herself clenching it, its familiar texture a subtle comfort. It was more than just a piece of wood. It was a symbol of continuity, of the lineage she was fighting so desperately to preserve. They reached the creek bed, only to find it bone dry, a testament to the long, unforgiving drought. The fire, finding no natural barrier, had already jumped the sandy expanse, scorching the banks on the other side. Kaya barked, a sharp, frustrated sound that was immediately swallowed by the roar of the flames. She pivoted, her mind racing, processing every scent, every sound, every flicker of light, searching for an opening. The world was closing in, a fiery embrace from which escape seemed increasingly impossible. Each path she attempted, each familiar landmark she sought out, now seemed to lead her deeper into the inferno, twisting familiar paths into treacherous traps. The heat pressed down on them, an invisible, suffocating weight, and the smoke. Now a dense grey shroud obscured all but the nearest fiery tendrils. Her pups huddled against her legs, their small whimpers barely audible above the infernal symphony of the burning jungle. Kaya knew, with a chilling certainty that settled deep in her soul, that her initial attempts were failing. The fire was simply too vast, too swift, too utterly merciless. They needed more than just a path. They needed a miracle. The acrid smoke clawed at Kaya's throat, each breath a searing reminder of the pervasive danger. The world had become a maelstrom of crackling flames and choking grey, the once vibrant greens of the jungle now reduced to charcoal and ash. Her mind, usually a sharp instrument of survival, was fraying at the edges, stretched taut by exhaustion and a terror that gnawed at her very core. She had led her 2 remaining pups through a gauntlet of falling debris and leaping fire, their tiny bodies pressing against her flanks, drawing strength from her proximity. But now, as a new front of fire roared to life with a sudden terrifying intensity, the world erupted around them. A shower of burning embers rained down, forcing her to instinctively swerve, and in that fleeting, chaotic moment, the high-pitched yelps of 2 of her babies were torn from the air. Her head whipped around, eyes wide with panic, searching through the swirling smoke. Her nose, usually so precise, was overwhelmed by the stench of burning eucalyptus and fear. She barked, a desperate, raw sound that was swallowed by the roar of the fire. Only 1 pup, a timid little female, remained huddled against her side, shivering uncontrollably. The others, her energetic little boy and another quiet sister, were gone, swallowed by the inferno. The realization hit Kaya with the force of a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. Her mission, once a frantic dash for general safety, had just splintered into a specific, agonizing quest for her lost children. The carved wooden totem, still clutched firmly in her jaws, felt heavier now, saturated with the unbearable weight of her grief and the desperate hope of finding them. Despair, a cold, insidious tendril, began to coil around her heart. The heat was relentless, baking her fur, parching her tongue. Her paws, calloused from a lifetime of traversing the rugged outback, smarted with every step on the superheated ground. She had always been a creature of indomitable will, a survivor against all odds. But this was different. This was a force of nature that dwarfed any predator, any drought she had ever faced. She paused, collapsing momentarily to rest her chin on the trembling head of her last remaining pup, sharing a moment of profound, wordless sorrow. The dense smoke blurred her vision, painting the world in shades of red and black. She felt a profound weariness seep into her bones, a lethargy that threatened to cement her to the fiery earth. She saw other creatures, usually masters of their own domains, flee with the same primal terror. Kangaroos, their powerful legs usually carrying them with effortless grace, bounded erratically, some stumbling and falling, never to rise again. A large goanna, its scales usually an emblem of ancient resilience, lay motionless, overcome by the smoke. The sight of these fallen, once mighty beings intensified Kaya's despair. It underscored the futility of individual strength against such a colossal adversary. The jungle, her sanctuary, her hunting ground, the cradle of her family, was turning into a tomb. Doubt, a venomous whisper, questioned her every step, every decision. Could she truly save anyone? Was it not better to conserve her strength for the 1 pup she still held? The thought, fleeting and horrifying, made her recoil. No, not her, not Kaya. She pushed herself up, staggering slightly, the wooden carving still a comforting, albeit painful, presence in her mouth. She had to try. She had to. Her ears, perpetually swiveling, strained against the roar of the fire, seeking any sound that wasn't the crackle of burning timber or the distant mournful cries of other animals. Then, faint, almost imperceptible through the din, she heard it. A small, weak whimper. It was a sound that pierced through the veil of her exhaustion and despair like a beacon. A surge of adrenaline, cold and sharp, coursed through her veins. It wasn't a trick of her desperate mind, it was real. With renewed, though still faltering vigor, Kaya pushed forward, following the faint auditory thread. She ignored the burning debris, the blistering heat, the instinct to turn back and protect her one remaining child. Her maternal instinct, a force far more powerful than any fear, now drove her relentlessly. She nudged her last pup to stay close, pushing her further into the maelstrom. The whimper grew slightly stronger, leading her toward a thicket of still smouldering ferns. She plunged into the undergrowth, leaves still hissing and smoking around her, her nose leading the way. And there, amidst the ash-covered foliage, barely distinguishable from the charred remnants of a fallen branch, was a small, trembling figure. It was her boy, her energetic, playful pup, now cowering and singed, his eyes wide with fear and pain, his tiny whimpers barely audible. He was pinned beneath a partially fallen, smouldering log, too weak to free himself. Relief, potent and overwhelming, washed over Kaya, so intense it almost buckled her knees. She dropped the wooden carving for a split second, nudging her last remaining pup away from the immediate danger, then immediately began to dig and pull at the edges of the heavy log with frantic urgency. Her teeth, designed for tearing flesh, now worked at the rough bark, her paws scrabbling at the earth. The log was too heavy for her alone, but she pushed and strained, every muscle screaming in protest, driven by a love so fierce it bordered on madness. She repositioned herself, bracing her powerful shoulders against the smouldering timber, pushing with every ounce of her remaining strength. The ground beneath her feet slid, hot and loose, but she grit her teeth, a low growl rumbling in her chest, not of aggression, but of pure, unadulterated resolve. Slowly, agonizingly, the log shifted, just enough. Her boy, seeing the sliver of space, wriggled out, whimpering softly, and immediately pressed himself against her side, joining his sister. 2. She had 2. The weight of despair lifted, replaced by a fierce, blazing determination. The glimmer of hope had ignited into a small but steady flame within her. Her mission was far from over, but now, with 2 precious lives clinging to her, her resolve was unwavering. She retook the smooth, worn wooden carving in her mouth, its familiar texture a small comfort amidst the chaos. She would find the 3rd. She had to. With the 2 pups now huddled close, their small bodies a source of renewed strength and purpose, against her burning flanks, Kaya pushed onward. The air grew thicker, each breath a searing torment, tasting of ash and desperation. The fire's roar seemed to amplify, a hungry beast devouring everything in its path. She kept her nose low, scanning the ground not just for the faintest scent of her missing pup, but for anything, any sign, any deviation in the apocalyptic landscape that might offer a clue, a path, a momentary reprieve. Her eyes, usually so sharp and discerning, now watered constantly from the acrid smoke, blurring the fiery chaos into a crimson haze. Yet amidst the swirling embers and the choking grey, a flicker of something unusual caught her attention. Her search for her lost pup led her through a particularly ravaged section of the forest where the flames had recently swept through, leaving behind a smoking, skeletal wasteland. The ground here was littered with charred branches and the ghostly remains of what had once been vibrant undergrowth. It was here, poking out from beneath a partially burned fern, that she saw it. A small, irregularly shaped object, glinting faintly in the hellish light. It was an anomaly, alien to the natural debris of the forest. Curiosity, a deeply ingrained trait in all dingoes, momentarily overcame her immediate primal drive to flee. She nudged her pups a little further back, a silent command for them to stay put, her eyes never leaving the mysterious object. Cautiously she approached, her powerful nose twitching, sifting through the scent of smoke and decay for any hint of danger. There was none. Only the metallic, almost sterile smell of something entirely foreign. It was a device intricately constructed, smaller than her paw, with a smooth, dark casing and a surprisingly bright, reflective surface on one side. It had a small, almost imperceptible button on its edge and a tiny, still glowing indicator light. It was clearly man-made, an object dropped by a human, perhaps in their own panicked retreat from the fire. Its purpose was utterly beyond her comprehension. Was it edible, dangerous, a discarded toy? Instinct, A complex tapestry woven from millions of years of survival told her it was significant. It didn't smell like food, nor did it exude the scent of a predator. Instead, it hummed with a faint, almost imperceptible energy, a vibration that resonated subtly in her pore. Its reflective surface shimmered, catching the chaotic light of the inferno and throwing back tiny, dancing sparks. She nudged it with her nose, then gently, tentatively picked it up in her jaws. The cool, smooth metal was a stark contrast to the scorching earth and the hot, smoky air. She held it carefully, her teeth not quite meeting, cradling it as she would a fragile egg. It felt important, though she knew not why. It was different, and in this world of overwhelming sameness, the ubiquitous fire and smoke, difference often meant a path, a resource, a chance. With the device now clutched securely alongside the familiar wooden carving in her mouth, a small, curious weight in her jaw, Kaya resumed her desperate sweep of the area. Her head lifted, scanning the horizon, not for her missing pup this time, but for something else. Something she didn't realize she was looking for until she saw it. Through a momentary clearing in the smoke, as if a giant hand had briefly swept the charcoal veil aside, an imposing silhouette appeared against the bruised orange sky. Far in the distance, cutting through the haze like a monolithic needle, stood a radio tower. Tall, angular, and defiantly untouched by the raging inferno around it, its skeletal structure seemed to pierce the very heavens. It was a landmark she recognized, a curious man-made mountain that had always been a distant, abstract presence on the periphery of her territory. She had never ventured close to it, respecting the invisible boundaries that humans so often erected, but now, it wasn't just a landmark, it was a beacon. It stood proud and unyielding, a solitary sentinel in a world gone mad. It represented a direction, a point of reference in a landscape rendered unrecognizable by fire. She didn't understand its function, its intricate web of cables and antennas, but she understood its position. It was a fixed point, a destination, and critically, from this vantage point, the raging inferno appeared marginally less intense around its base. It represented a potential escape route, a path away from the immediate engulfing flames. A new surge of energy, cold and sharp, coursed through Kaya. The glimmer of hope she had felt upon finding her second pup now blazed into a potent, unwavering flame of determination. The two pups, sensing her shift in focus, pressed closer, their small bodies radiating trust. She looked at the radio tower, then down at the precious burden in her mouth, the worn wooden carving, a symbol of family and survival, and the strange reflective device, an unknown key. Her resolve was ironclad. She would protect her children, she would navigate this fiery hell, and she would find her way to that tower. It was a gamble, a desperate, instinct-driven gamble, but it was the only one she had. With a low growl of commitment, Kaya turned her head towards the distant, towering structure and began her perilous journey. 2 precious lives and a mysterious device held firmly in her grasp, the raging inferno her unrelenting antagonist. The small huddle of 3, a mother and her 2 pups, pushed through the suffocating smoke and scorching air. Kaya, with the wooden carving once again secure in her jaws, her other pup still clinging to her back, led the way, a silent prayer echoing in her fierce heart for the third. The radio tower, an imposing skeletal silhouette against the bruised, smoke-choked sky, seemed impossibly far, yet it represented their only discernible direction, a landmark in a landscape of terrifying sameness. Every step was an agony, each breath a struggle against the acrid air that burned her lungs. The ground, now a treacherous mosaic of ash, smouldering embers, and heat-cracked earth, crumbled beneath her paws. One wrong step and they could all plunge into a hidden hollow or a freshly formed pit of fire. She moved with a desperate, almost primal grace, her senses hyper-alert, guiding her precious cargo through the inferno. The fire, like a living, malevolent entity, seemed to shift and surge, blocking paths she thought clear moments before. Sudden gusts of wind, hot and dry, would whip through the forest, fanning the flames into a frenzy, sending showers of burning embers raining down on them. Kaya would instinctively flatten herself, covering her pups with her body. enduring the searing pain as sparks landed on her fur, her skin. The pups, whimpering softly, burrowed deeper into her warmth, their trust in her absolute. Their small, fragile lives were entirely in her paws, a responsibility that weighed heavier than any physical burden. Her internal struggle was a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. The sheer physical exhaustion was crushing. Her muscles screamed, her head throbbed, and her body, though resilient, was reaching its limits. But even more unbearable was the gnawing guilt for her lost pup. Had she been fast enough, clever enough, strong enough? The doubt was a corrosive acid, eating away at her resolve, threatening to drown her in despair. Yet, every time she glanced at the two small, trembling bodies pressed against her, their innocent eyes reflecting the terror and the unwavering faith they placed in her, a fresh wave of determination would surge through her. She was their world, their protector, and she would not fail them, not now, not ever. Her thoughts, stripped down to basic raw instinct, revolved solely around survival, around finding safety, around somehow impossibly reuniting her fragmented family. The image of the radio tower, a distant, unwavering sentinel, became her mantra, her single-minded focus through the blinding smoke and relentless heat. As they pressed on, the landscape morphed from burning forest to a more open, yet still dangerous, expanse of scorched earth sparsely dotted with smouldering scrub. Here, the immediate danger of falling trees was lessened, but the visibility was even worse, the smoke thick and low-hanging. It was in this eerie, post-apocalyptic terrain that they encountered others. A group of wallabies, their fur singed and matted, bounded past in a panicked frenzy, their eyes wide with fear, barely noticing the dingo and her pups. A solitary, soot-stained koala, its fur blackened, moved with heartbreaking slowness across their path, its small paws burnt, its eyes holding a vacant, hopeless stare. Kaya felt a pang of profound sadness, a shared understanding of the overwhelming destruction. Then a sudden piercing shriek cut through the air. A wedge-tailed eagle, magnificent even in distress, spiraled wildly, its wings scorched, before plummeting to the ground with a sickening thud. Kaya flinched, pulling her pups closer. The fragility of life, even the powerful, was starkly evident. It was a stark reminder of their own precarious existence. Further on, a low guttural growl halted her. Through the swirling smoke, a large, powerful wild boar, its tusks bared, its eyes bloodshot with terror and rage, emerged from the haze. It was disoriented, frantic, and clearly agitated, its usual cautious nature overcome by primal fear. It didn't see Kaya as another creature fleeing the fire. It saw a threat, a competitor for whatever scarce haven might exist. Its snorts were loud, challenging. Kaya froze, her hackles rising instinctively, her body tensing, preparing to fight if necessary. She could not afford an injury, not with her pups relying on her. But the boar, after a moment of tense standoff, suddenly veered away with another snarl, crashing through a thicket of charred bushes, its own terror overriding its aggression. It was a fleeting encounter, a momentary obstacle, but it underscored the chaotic desperation gripping all the creatures caught in the fire's wrath. She continued, the small, reflective device still clutched in her other pup's mouth, its purpose a mystery, but its presence a strange, almost talismanic comfort. She kept her gaze fixed on the radio tower, a distant, unmoving pinprick of hope in the vast, burning canvas of her world. The roar of the fire seemed to intensify, becoming a deep, consuming thrum that vibrated through the very earth, a monstrous heartbeat echoing the desperate pulse of her own. She tasted ash and fear, but the burning desire to protect her pups, to somehow lead them to safety, propelled her onward, one painful, determined step after another. Each breath was a conscious effort, each stride a testament to her unyielding will. The tower grew steadily, imperceptibly closer, a silent promise in the heart of the raging inferno. Kaya, with her two surviving pups huddled close, emerged from the smouldering thicket, her senses overwhelmed by the acrid smoke and the oppressive heat. The inferno raged behind them, a monstrous entity devouring everything in its path, its roar a constant, terrifying symphony. But as she pushed onwards, her eyes fixed on the distant, hazy silhouette of the radio tower, She began to perceive subtle shifts in the air, nuances beyond the fire's immediate threat. There was a different kind of tension, a prickling sensation that wasn't born of heat or ash. It was a human tension, sharp and unsettling, carried on the shifting currents of the wind. She wasn't just fleeing a natural disaster, she was hurtling towards something else entirely. The jungle, even in its ravaged state, seemed to hold its breath. The usual cacophony of panicked wildlife had quieted, replaced by an eerie stillness, punctuated only by the crackle of distant flames and the frantic thumping of her own heart. Kaya's instincts, honed by countless generations of survival, screamed at her. She slowed her pace, her ears swiveling, trying to decipher the faint, unfamiliar sounds carried on the wind. Low, guttural voices, the metallic clink of something hard, a sense of coiled readiness like predators stalking prey. She pressed her nose into the fur of her pups, urging them closer, her protective hackles rising despite her profound exhaustion. They whimpered softly, mirroring her disquiet. The radio tower, once a beacon of indifferent hope, now seemed to loom with an ominous presence. Its metallic latticework stood stark against the smoky sky, a sentinel observing a burgeoning human drama. As she drew nearer, navigating through patches of still-burning underbrush and across scorched earth, the human sounds became clearer, more distinct. It wasn't just voices, it was a standoff. Two distinct groups, their positions marked by hushed commands and the occasional glint of sunlight off something hard and angular. They were too engrossed in their own conflict, too focused on each other, to notice the towering wall of fire bearing down on them. They were like ants squabbling on a leaf, oblivious to the inferno consuming the branch beneath them. The small, reflective device she carried, clutched carefully in her jaws alongside the wooden carving, suddenly sparked to life. It had been largely inert since she'd first found it, a cool, smooth enigma. Now it flickered. A faint, almost inaudible hum emanated from it, a rhythmic pulse of light that cast faint, fleeting reflections on the ash-laden ground. The light was intermittent at first, a hesitant glimmer. Then it intensified, glowing with a soft, persistent luminescence. It wasn't bright enough to be seen from a distance, not yet, but it was a tangible change, a sign that the device was perhaps reacting to the proximity of the tower, or perhaps to the heightened electromagnetic activity of the human equipment nearby. Whatever the cause, it was a new, unexpected element in her desperate flight. Kaya risked a quick glance at the device, then tucked it more securely, its soft hum a strange counterpoint to the growing tension. Her focus remained primarily on the surrounding environment. The air was heavy, not just with smoke but with a palpable sense of aggression. She could smell the scent of fear mixed with human sweat and something metallic, gun oil, though she didn't understand its significance. Her keen eyesight picked out movement behind a cluster of smoldering rocks, then another behind a fallen tree trunk. Two factions clearly armed, locked in a silent, deadly tableau. They were on the very edge of the fire's advancing front, unknowingly trapped between their self-made conflict and nature's raging fury. The irony was stark. Humans, with their complex tools and their profound capacity for destruction, were about to be blindsided by a force far older and more indiscriminate than any weapon they possessed. The leading edge of the bushfire, a roaring, hungry beast of flame and smoke, was now less than a kilometer away. She could feel its breath, hot and suffocating on her fur. She could hear the thunderous collapse of trees, the explosive bursts of superheated air. The fire was gaining speed, fueled by dry undergrowth and gusts of wind, turning the air into a turbulent, fiery maelstrom. Her internal struggle intensified. Every instinct screamed at her to turn, to find another path, to escape the triple threat of fire, danger, and now, human conflict. But there was no other path. The fire had sealed off all other routes. The radio tower, once a symbol of potential escape, had become the funnel, the inescapable bottleneck. She was being driven towards the human standoff, a dingo caught between two warring species, her own and the volatile, unpredictable humans. Her small, fragile pups whimpered again, sensing her distress, their tiny bodies trembling against her flank. The glowing device in her mouth pulsed with more urgency now, its faint hum rising in pitch. It was almost as if it too sensed the impending collision, the deadly intersection of natural disaster and human folly. She was a single, exhausted creature, carrying two precious lives and a small, increasingly active artifact, about to stumble into a brewing human battle, all while the wild, untamed fury of the Australian bushfire prepared to consume everything in its path. The danger was no longer abstract. It was imminent, a suffocating, terrifying embrace of fire and conflict. Kaya braced herself, her legs burning, her lungs aching, her heart a frantic drumbeat in her chest. She had come too far, lost too much, to turn back now. The tower and the humans below it represented both her only way out and her greatest unknown peril. The wind shifted, bringing with it not just smoke, but the distant metallic scent of human fear mixed with the raw elemental power of the approaching flames. She was directly in the path of a disaster. The ground beneath Kaya's paws became a crucible of heat and ash, each step an agony as she pushed her weary body through the infernal landscape. The radio tower loomed impossibly large now, its metallic structure a dark skeletal finger pointing accusatorily at the smoke-choked sky. She could discern the individual struts, the intricate web of antennae, all appearing strangely fragile against the backdrop of the raging blaze. The air vibrated with a low guttural growl that was part fire, part human tension, an unsettling discord that grated on her senses. Her remaining pup, a small, courageous bundle of fur, whimpered softly, its tiny nose pressed against Kaya's side, seeking comfort she could barely provide. Her muscles screamed in protest, each sinew stretched to its breaking point. The smoke had begun to burn not just her lungs, but her very eyes, blurring her vision until the world was a swirling vortex of orange and black. Yet her maternal instinct, an unyielding force stronger than any pain, propelled her forward. She stumbled, regaining her footing with a desperate lunge, the precious wooden carving still clutched firmly between her teeth, its smooth, familiar texture a grounding presence amidst the chaos. The reflective device, too, remained in her vice-like grip, occasionally emitting a soft, almost imperceptible thrum that felt more like a vibration in her jawbone than an audible sound. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of torment, her front paws touched the rough concrete base of the radio tower. It was a minuscule island of relative solidity in a sea of incandescent embers and ash. With a gasping sigh that tore through her lungs, she collapsed, her body giving out completely. The weight of her pup pressed against her, a tiny living beacon in her overwhelming exhaustion. She lay panting, her chest heaving, every fiber of her being screaming for rest. The world tilted precariously, threatening to pull her into a void of oblivion. As she fell, the small reflective device and the wooden carving slipped from her jaws. They tumbled a short distance, landing with soft, almost unheard taps on the gritty concrete. The human standoff, however, was far from silent. The air crackled with hostility, a thick, suffocating blanket of unspoken threats and thinly veiled aggression. Kaya's ears, despite her exhaustion, picked up the metallic click of a weapon being readied, the strained whispers of command, the shuffling of feet as figures repositioned themselves. She could feel the volatile energy emanating from the two warring factions, a potent brew on the cusp of eruption. They were poised, frozen in a tableau of impending violence, unaware of the small, desperate Dingo at their feet, or the fiery behemoth roaring down upon them. Then it happened. The device, which had landed on its edge, toppled just slightly, triggered perhaps by the tremors of the approaching fire, or the slight shift of Kaya's exhausted body. It emitted a sudden, blinding flash of light, not unlike a camera flash, but more sustained, coupled with a high-pitched, piercing shriek. The sound was alien, cutting through the general din of the jungle fire and the tense silence of the human conflict like a knife. It was an unmistakable, attention-grabbing alarm, impossible to ignore. Every head snapped towards the source of the sudden disturbance. The humans, their faces grim and set on confrontation, instinctively flinched, their weapons momentarily lowered as their eyes adjusted to the unexpected brilliance. The piercing shriek, sustained and unwavering, seized their full attention, overriding the simmering anger and tactical calculations that had dominated their minds moments before. As their gazes settled on the source of the commotion, they saw it. A small, smoke-stained dingo, her fur matted and singed, lying utterly depleted at the base of the tower. Beside her, a trembling pup, barely more than an infant, huddled close, and amidst the dust and ash, still flashing intermittently, lay the strange device. The humans, momentarily stripped of their animosity by sheer surprise, stared. But it wasn't just the dingo that drew their eyes. Beyond Kaya and her pup, beyond the immediate circle of their self-imposed battlefield, a monstrous wall of orange and red was devouring the horizon. The fire, now merely hundreds of meters away, was a terrifying, undeniable reality. Trees exploded into flames with deafening roars, embers rained down like fiery snow, and the heat, no longer a distant threat, was a palpable, suffocating force. The acrid smell of burning eucalyptus and the stench of scorched earth filled their nostrils, replacing the scent of gun oil and human fear with something far more primal and terrifying. The human conflict, so potent moments ago, dissolved in the face of this overwhelming, indiscriminate force of nature. Their weapons, still clutched in their hands, seemed suddenly trivial, laughably inadequate against such a foe. The revelation slammed into them with the force of a physical blow. Their petty squabble, their carefully planned standoff, was about to be engulfed by a catastrophe far greater than any they could inflict upon each other. They had been so consumed by their own strife, so locked in their dangerous dance, that they had been utterly blind to the true existential threat bearing down upon them all. The dingo, gasping for breath, her pup trembling, had unwittingly delivered a stark, undeniable message, a dire warning that transcended language and conflict. The fire, a hungry, roaring beast, truly cared for no sides, no allegiances, only consumption. For the first time, all eyes, friend and foe alike, were fixed on the same terrifying enemy. The device, having tumbled from Kaya's exhausted jaws, landed with a soft clatter on the dry earth. It wasn't the sound that arrested the human conflict, but the sudden blinding flash of light it emitted, followed by a piercing, high-frequency shriek that cut through the oppressive quiet just before the next volley of gunfire. Both factions, poised for attack, froze. Their eyes, instinctively drawn to the source of the unexpected intrusion, widened in disbelief. Lying prone in the dust, barely moving, was a smoke-stained dingo, her fur singed. A tiny pup nestled against her side. Beside her, pulsing with an unnatural, urgent luminescence, was the device that had shattered their concentration. For a beat, a collective silence descended, broken only by the rising roar of the approaching fire. Then, a voice from one side, laced with urgency, shouted, "What in God's name is that?" Another from the opposing group retorted, "Who cares? Look behind you." And that was the true turning point. The brief distraction caused by Kaya's arrival and the device's activation had bought them precious seconds, enough for them to truly see beyond their immediate adversaries. The towering wall of flame, previously obscured by the smoke and their myopic focus on each other, was now undeniable. It was a monstrous entity, consuming the forest with terrifying speed, its heat palpable even at this distance. The radio tower, their strategic objective, was directly in its path. The wind, which had been fanning their conflict, was now whipping the inferno towards them with merciless efficiency. The metallic tang of gun oil and human sweat was quickly being overwhelmed by the acrid stench of burning eucalyptus and the dizzying smell of superheated air. The realization dawned simultaneously across both groups. Their petty territorial dispute, their ideological battle, all of it was utterly insignificant in the face of this primal, unstoppable force. The dingo, the small, desperate creature that had run through the heart of the conflagration, became an unwitting symbol of their shared peril and a strange catalyst for a temporary truce. Her presence, a stark tableau of raw survival, highlighted the absurdity of their own human-made war against the backdrop of nature's indifference. A grizzled leader from one faction, his face momentarily stripped of its usual stoicism, lowered his rifle. "Cease fire!" he bellowed, his voice tinged with a new kind of fear. "Everyone, fall back! The fire! The opposing side, recognizing the universal threat, echoed the order. Weapons were holstered, grudges momentarily forgotten. The immediate enemy was no longer the human across the divide, but the unyielding march of the flames. Yet even in their hasty retreat, a flicker of something humane ignited. One of the soldiers, a young woman with a kind face, noticed Kaya struggling to rise, her legs trembling. The pup whimpered, pressing closer. The fire was closing in fast, and the dingo, exhausted and wounded, was trapped. Instinctively, she broke ranks, cautiously approaching Kaya. Her comrades, initially hesitant, followed her lead, their shared humanity momentarily resurfacing from beneath layers of conflict and training. "Easy, girl," the woman murmured, extending a hand slowly. Kaya, normally wary of humans, was too spent to resist. Her eyes, filled with a mixture of pain and primal fear, met the woman's. Another soldier quickly created a makeshift stretcher from torn canvas, and with surprising coordination and speed, they worked together, members of opposing forces, to lift the dingo and her pup. They moved with urgency, not just for their own lives, but for Kaya's and her offspring. It was a strange, silent alliance forged in the crucible of a burning world. They cleared a path, not just for themselves, but specifically for Kaya and her pup, guiding them towards a less consumed part of the landscape, a small, rocky outcrop that offered a temporary refuge. The fire roared past the radio tower, engulfing it in a fiery embrace, its metallic structure groaning under the intense heat. The tower, once a symbol of human ingenuity and a point of contention, was now just another casualty in nature's devastating display. Finally, having reached a relative pocket of safety, Kaya stumbled free, the pup still clinging to her. She looked back at the towering column of smoke and flame, a silent acknowledgement of the crucible she had just endured. Her raw courage, her unwavering maternal instinct, had inadvertently done what no diplomacy or force of arms could. It had brokered a fragile peace, however temporary, between warring factions. The wooden carving, her touchstone through the inferno, was still clutched in her mouth, a symbol of the lives she carried, the world she protected. The human soldiers, having also found their own precarious safety, watched her go, a newfound respect etched on their faces. The device, now silent, lay discarded near the tower's base, its purpose fulfilled. The immediate conflict had been diffused, their focus shifted from territorial boundaries to the shared vulnerability of life in the face of such raw, untamed power. For Kaya, the immediate danger had passed. Her journey was far from over, but she had survived, and she had saved her pup. The jungle would heal eventually, and life would persist. What other hidden stories lie within the wild, shaping destinies in ways we can barely comprehend? Hit the like button if this tale moved you, share it with a friend, and click here to watch our next astonishing animal story.